The President of the United States, President Joe Biden, has committed to funding the cost of the rebuild. How confident are you that he can get that financing through Congress?
Well, I'm confident that it's imperative that we can get it done. If you look at the economic impact of the Port of Baltimore, the Port of Baltimore is worthy and contributes about $70 billion to the American economy. The Port of Baltimore is the largest port in this country for new cars, for heavy trucks, for agricultural equipment, for spices and sugars, for coal. A huge chunk of the American economy relies on the Port of Baltimore. And so I'm thankful that the President has led and rightfully acknowledged that what happened last week was not just a human catastrophe. I mean, we lost 6 Marylanders during this catastrophe. And it was not just an economic catastrophe for Maryland or for the region. This was an economic catastrophe for the country. And so our ability to be able to rally in a bipartisan fashion and to be able to get the port reopened and reopen the and get the bridge rebuilt is going to be a national priority.
So 2 issues there. So reopen the port and reopen the bridge. Can we deal with the first one first? Reopen the port. How straightforward is that going to be?
This is a remarkably complex operation. We've never had a maritime disaster like this where you have not only a ship, a vessel, that's the size of the Eiffel Tower and the weight of the Washington Monument that is now stuck in the middle of the Patapsco River. And part of the reason that it's stuck in the middle of the river is because it has a bridge, an iconic bridge, that's sitting on top of it. 3,000 to 4,000 tons of steel are sitting on top of the bridge, and the remainder of the bridge is sitting at the bottom of the river. So this is still a remarkably complex operation, one where we have our divers who are in there every day, and they literally cannot see anywhere between a foot or 2 in front of them because of the amount of wreckage that's in the water. And so the ability that we've now been able to open up 2 channels that can now have up to a 14-foot depth, so you can get certain commercial vehicles. We've had 59 commercial transfers that have already taken place, and hopefully by the end of May we'll have fully functioning operations for the port. Is a staggering accomplishment when you think about the speed and the coordination that was required in order to make that happen.
So end of May for the port, Governor, but what about the rebuild of the bridge? What does this timeline look like?
The rebuild of the bridge is going to be a longer timeline. The thing that we know is for that bridge that over 36,000 people went over that bridge every single day. That was the bridge that got people from where they lived to where they worked, from where they lived to where they worshipped, to where they lived to where they went to school. It was also a key and a crucial part of port operations because for the Port of Baltimore, it's not just maritime operations, it's also rail and it's also truck operations that exist in the Port of Baltimore. And so in order to truly get the Port of Baltimore up and going in the same kind of fashion that it was before, getting that bridge rebuilt is going to be imperative, and we know that's going to be a longer timeline, but we are committed to making sure that we get the key bridge rebuilt.
And I know that's why you're going to be in Washington today to be speaking to lawmakers about the funding to rebuild this. I was struck by what Senator Cruz said yesterday. He says that he wants to get this rebuilt as soon as possible, but he said it's bureaucratic dithering and lengthy environmental reviews, kind of blaming it on Democrats for this bureaucracy, environmental reviews that could potentially make this a long-term process and not as quick as, say, you and residents of Maryland want to see. Do you agree with him that this should be really fast-tracked?
Well, I'm thankful that Senator Cruz is a yes on making sure that we can get 100% funding for it. And I'm thankful that Senator Cruz understands how imperative it is that we both get the port reopened and also get the bridge rebuilt. I also know that the White House, I mean, I had my first phone call from the White House at 3 o'clock in the morning of the tragedy. And the White House has been with us every single step of the way. The Secretary of Transportation was literally down there, boots on ground before noon to be able to assess the damage and assess what they can do to help. I have yet to receive a phone call from Senator Cruz. I've yet to receive a visit from Senator Cruz. I would welcome him to come to Baltimore for him to see exactly the circumstances and the situation that we're dealing with. And I'm sure when he came, he would also see that there are members of the Biden administration who have been on the ground the entire time, and I'm sure he would spend time with them as well when he came to Baltimore. I know this needs to move quickly. This needs to move fast. We need to focus on safety, and we've got to get this thing rebuilt. rebuilt, and I'm glad we are building a bipartisan support structure around what it's going to take and around what that can look like.
You talk about how quickly it's important to rebuild the bridge, and I know a lot of people would agree from every facet of the region. How much are you exploring other types of financing if it doesn't come from the government, whether it's issuing municipal bonds or getting public-private partnerships?
I think that all options should be on the table, and all options are on the table. You know, I don't come from a political background. I'm an Army guy. I was a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division, and then when I left the Army, I started a business. So I understand the role that the public sector, the private sector, that philanthropy is also going to play in this. And even if you just look at the past week, you know, we've used every lever at our disposal to be able to address this issue. I actually issued an executive order that released $60 million of state funding that went towards supporting our port workers. We actually signed legislation that focused on things like providing scholarships to the children of transportation workers who have died on the job, and also providing additional supports for businesses. We also helped launch something called the Maryland Tough, Baltimore Strong Alliance, which is over 80 organizations, private sector, businesses, and philanthropy. We've now raised over $15 million that's going towards port workers, and also have a commitment from businesses to do things like they're not laying off their workers. If they have to temporarily move operations from the Port of Baltimore, they're going to bring them, they've committed to bringing them back to the Port of Baltimore. So we know it's important to use every single lever at our disposal, and that every sector, private sector, public sector, philanthropy, have all got to be involved and at the table in order for us to get to our long-term conclusions.
Well, as a Marylander, as a business owner, as a military man, you fully understand the importance of infrastructure and what the ramifications could be the longer that this goes on. Is there a drop-dead time where, say, it takes 2 years and that's the maximum that it could take to rebuild this bridge and get operations, to reopen the port, to get things back up and running, where Maryland, Baltimore can withstand that, versus after that, where it becomes a real financial weight that has much more punitive consequences?
Well, it's a financial weight now. And it's the reason that we are moving as fast as humanly possible. It's the reason that we have 24/7 operations that are going right now. And that cadence, that speed, it's not going to stop. I'm committed to making sure that we are moving with speed on this, because we have to remember there are tens of thousands of port workers that right now are being impacted by this. There are entire communities that now have watched their way of life completely upended. There are industries that the country relies on that are now at either a stop or a stall because of what has happened with this port tragedy. And so, you know, the how imperative it is that we move fast on this, it sits with me every single day. And I know we are going to, and I'm going to demand 24/7 operations until we accomplish 4 goals. Bring closure to these families, reopen these channels, make sure we're taking care of our people who've been impacted by this, and getting the bridge rebuilt. Governor, how much money do you need? Well, the truth is that we don't have an official price tag on that right now. That we know this is going to be a long journey. We know this is going to be something that is expensive. We also know, though, taken place thus far. If you would have asked me 2 weeks ago, seeing what I saw, and said that 2 weeks later we would have 2 commercial channels open, that by the end of this month we should have up to a 35-foot depth in draft that should be able to get a lot of the new cars and roll on, roll off that the Port of Baltimore relies on up and going, and by the end of May we should have the port fully functioning. I would have said, when you look at the damage and the devastation that we saw, I would have said that seems very ambitious, but that's where we are. And so we know this is going to be a long journey. We know this is not going to be an inexpensive journey, but it's a journey that we all have got to be committed to, because this means everything to not just our region and our state, but to the long-term growth of maritime operations in the American economy.